Sorry about that. So this is the course. You can see Sapiens Institute. If you are interested, jot it down. As I said, it's completely free of charge. You just open an account and you can get access to all of their course material. There's a lot of courses on there. And this comes with a slide deck of about 622 slides to go along with it. So it's quite comprehensive. Just as an overview, you could see introduction and background. Unit 2, as you can see here on the left, is about worldviews, Islam and Western modernity. And I will be giving a very short overview of that section in tonight's presentation. But if you're interested in what you hear this evening, then you can go to this course. And even without listening to the whole course, you can just go straight to Unit 2 and get an 8-hour version of what I'm going to present in about 25 minutes, inshallah. And you can see the other units, the sexual revolution and gay liberation. Unit 4, gender, sex, and homosexuality in Islam. Unit 5, LGBT and LGBT, psychological and medical perspectives. Unit 6, socio-political considerations. Unit 7, resources and guiding principles. So that's the larger course, but again, you can just listen to parts of it as well. So what is a worldview? Unit 2 of this course, Worldviews, Islam and Western Modernity. A worldview in essentially, and I just took this definition from a Christian website, and I thought it was a good one, so I adopted it. A person's worldview represents his most fundamental beliefs and assumptions about the universe he inhabits. It reflects how he would answer all the big questions of human existence, fundamental questions about who and what we are, where we came from, why we're here, where, if anywhere, we're headed, the meaning and purpose of life, the nature of the afterlife, if there is one, of course, and what counts as a good life here and now. Few people think through these issues in any depth, and fewer still have firm answers to such questions. But a person's worldview will at least incline him towards certain kinds of answers and away from others. So the definition goes on, or the description: worldviews shape and inform our experiences of the world around us. Like spectacles with colored lenses, they affect what we see and how we see it. Depending on the color of the lenses, some things may be seen more easily, or conversely, they may be de-emphasized or distorted. Indeed, some things may not be seen at all. Worldviews also largely determine people's opinions on matters of ethics and politics. What a person thinks about abortion, euthanasia, same-sex relationships, environmental ethics, economic policy, public education, and so on, will depend on his underlying worldview more than anything else. As such, worldviews play a central and defining role in our lives. They shape what we believe and what we're willing to believe, how we interpret our experiences, how we behave in response to those experiences, and how we relate to others. Our thoughts and our actions are conditioned by our worldviews. So, you know, when you open your eyes and look out at the world, right, everything you think about the world, the way you process the world is based on a particular set of assumptions. Right? You're not literally just seeing the world as it is, you're bringing assumptions to the table. So, for example, what you consider to be real, right? Or what a worldview, what a culture, what a civilization at a given point in time considers to be real. What kind of entities exist in the world, right? Physical things exist. What about non-physical things? Are there such things as non-physical entities like souls, or is that just nonsense, right? What is knowledge? How do we know? What does it mean to know? When you say in the modern world, we know that, right? People understand something very specific. It means we know scientifically. You don't even have to say it because it's taken for granted. To know means to know empirically in the modern world. But as Muslims, that's not necessarily our definition of knowledge. We have a different view of what knowledge is and a different view of the sources of knowledge, right? Which is going to have profound influences on what we think we can know as human beings. What is a human being, right? We talk about, mankind, the origins of man. And you have these debates about, evolution and creation and all of this. Well, what is this human being that you're even talking about, this insan? How do you define this insan? Is it just a body shape, like a, upright creature with an opposable thumb that walks upright like Homo erectus? Is it more than that? Right? Our definition of what a human being might be, an insan, the one whose origins we're seeking and whose destiny also concerns us, might not necessarily be the same as the entity that scientists are talking about when they talk about human beings, right? So what is an insan? That's a philosophical question before it's an empirical question. But most people don't, view it that way. They just run straight to the kind of scientific discussion of it without realizing that there's so many embedded assumptions behind doing that, right? That all go back to precisely this question of what a worldview is, And then how should we live our lives? What is right and what is wrong? What is the nature of good and evil? And how do we know it as human beings? How do we know it's right? Is it based on reason? Can we think our way to an ethical system? Is it based on social convention? That's a very popular view today, right? Everything is a social construct. Everything is just allegedly created from, social conditions, right? And there's no truth that you can grasp beyond just kind of transient social constructions, right? Is that true? Or is there a source of moral knowledge that we can appeal to in order to establish objectively what is right and wrong? What is what are the minimum requirements of a just political order and a legal system? Where is valid law derived from? Law that, for example, a state can rightfully impose on people, right? I mean, imposition always includes some violence or threat of violence. Where does law come from? A law that has the right to be obeyed by people, right? So all of these questions are what form our worldview. And just like our native language, everybody has a worldview just like everybody has a language, at least one. Some people grow up, multilingual, bilingual, trilingual, but everyone has at least one language. It's part of who we are as human beings, right? And normally your native language, especially if you grow up in a monolingual environment, is so ingrained in you and so second nature that you don't think about your language, right? You just open your mouth and English comes out. If you grew up in America, just English comes out. And you don't think about the structure of your language. And many times if a foreigner asks you, oh, is this right? You say, no, we don't say it like that. We say it this way. And if they ask you why, like many native speakers have a great deal of trouble explaining why. Well, I don't know, that's just how we say it. It's difficult to actually analyze because it's so intuitive. And similarly, our worldview is like that as well. It's like the language of thought. All of the assumptions about the world that we have, what exists and doesn't exist, what knowledge is, what human beings are, what it means to know what is right and wrong. Is there a purpose, right? All of this is so deeply embedded that until you are taught to think about it and to analyze it and to grasp it consciously, it usually just goes totally unnoticed, right? So very often, especially again, if you grew up with one language, it's only when you start to learn a second language that you say, oh, languages actually differ. In English, we say like a gray jacket. In many languages, you would say a jacket gray. You would put the adjective after. And you wouldn't even think that that was a possibility until you come across a language that does that. And you say, oh, well, there's actually some variation here, right? And through learning another language, you can actually reflect on your own. The worldview is the same. You have to kind of be taught to unpack it and to look at it, to understand it. Now, why does it matter? It matters because as Muslims, we uphold Islam as being true, in and of itself, objectively true. And everything that the Messenger has brought, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everything that Allah has revealed to us, this is telling us, this is informing us of the truth on all of these, realms that we just talked about. What exists, how do we know, what our purpose is, what's right and wrong. All of these things are heavily informed by revelation, as we'll see as we go through. And in the modern world, right, this is a post-Christian world. It is a post-religious world. The modern age is very self-consciously secular. It prides itself on being secular. It prides itself on having outgrown, medieval religion, right? And it starts from completely different premises, totally different premises. And when you start from completely different premises, you're going to come to very different conclusions. And often those conclusions are in conflict with each other because they are derived from different assumptions. And why does this matter? Because in the world today, we as Muslims, for most of Islamic history, Islam was dominant civilizationally. Muslims were politically and economically stronger than any other society. And of course, we came into contact with many other societies, both living and past societies, like the Greek legacy, which was translated into Arabic, and our scholars had to go through it. And they had to debate, and they took what was useful, and they rejected other things, and they modified other things. And we did this over many centuries. Same with, Persian knowledge and Indian knowledge and so forth. But we did it from a position of strength and confidence. But in the modern world, in the last 300-400 years, the power dynamics have changed, as we all know, drastically with the rise of modern Europe, right? This kind of, again, secularizing post-Christian modern Europe, which is a kind of materialist civilization based on largely materialist presumptions. And that society has now become dominant. And especially for us Muslims who grow up in the West, we are constantly surrounded by it. So again, it's just like if you take the language metaphor, say your family comes from Pakistan or from Egypt or wherever, and you speak your home language at home, Urdu, Arabic, whatever. When you go outside, everyone's speaking English around you, right? What language is going to be your dominant language? English. Everyone knows that, right? And your home language will be like L2, second language status, right? Similarly, when we're in the masjid, we kind of know how to talk Islamic. Assalamu alaikum, akhi, how's it going? This and that. We have the right responses. We know what we're supposed to kind of say and believe. And I'm not saying we don't believe it, or we do, but we step out into the, out there, into New York City, and all of a sudden, people aren't speaking Islam anymore. They're speaking something else. And so we switch. We have to code switch. We switch our register, right? And sometimes we almost become like a different personality. The way you interact with non-Muslims, talk to them, the way we also, sometimes the assumptions, we kind of take off the Islamic hat and put on a different set of assumptions. And we don't want to do that because when it comes to the worldview, when it comes to language, right, many immigrant families, they're here for a number of years, they mix. Even the parents who came from the old country, 20 years later, they're mixing half Arabic, half English, whatever, okay? Whatever you think about language purity, it doesn't really have any larger assumption or larger, consequences. You're not going to be asked on the Day of Judgment, to put it frankly, how pure of an Urdu you spoke at home, for example. It doesn't really matter, right? The point is communication. But when it comes to the worldview, it matters, right? Because what are we judged on? We are judged on our beliefs, what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our affirmation of what Allah has revealed to us, and our acting accordingly. Right? So if our beliefs and our worldview, the sum total of our beliefs is our worldview. So if our worldview is impacted and it is admixed and it is adulterated by, other conceptions that come from a different paradigm altogether, and we start to take those on and they become dominant, just like English becomes dominant, that thought language becomes dominant and that conceptual framework becomes dominant. Right? This can have very serious implications for our faith, right? Because we might adopt beliefs about the world and about ourselves and about what's right and wrong and all of these things which are actually contrary to what is true. And those are things that we will be held responsible for on the Day of Judgment, right? So we don't want to admix our worldview. We don't want to code switch like we might do with a language, right? It doesn't mean that we isolate ourselves. It doesn't mean that we don't speak with other people, that we don't engage. Of course, we do that, but we have to do that with clarity of our vision, clarity of our worldview. Now, what happens a lot of times, I know this sounds very theoretical so far, so let's put some, make it a little bit more concrete. A lot of times questions come up, and Muslims, we kind of grasp at straws about how to answer them. So questions about, for example, I mentioned the origins of human beings. Big debate, right? Well, the Quran says Allah created Adam, alayhi salam. The Bible says that too. Scientists say that's nonsense. We all, evolved from lower life forms. With or without some guidance, that's a different question, right? How do you answer this, right? Now, we can't go into that. The course gets into it, right? We can't go into it tonight. What about, again, unseen realities? Like, do you believe in angels? If you're asked that in any college classroom, probably not many people's hands will go up. If you're a Muslim, your hand goes up. If you don't believe in angels, you're not a Muslim. Why not? Well, who brought the Quran to the Prophet ﷺ? The angel Jibreel. If you don't believe in angels, then I guess you can't believe that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Oh, well, maybe Allah just revealed it to him directly. Well, how do you know that? Well, okay, if the Quran is really the word of God, then what it says is true about the universe, and it speaks about and affirms the existence of angels, right? Now, it might be embarrassing in a modern, college classroom to raise your hand, but again, that's because we're operating on a different assumption of what knowledge is all about. Again, when a modern person says, if you say, I believe in angels, they'll say, well, how do you know? You can't know. You say, no, I can know, I have proof. They say, no, give me the proof. What do they mean when they say, give me the proof? They say, give me empirical proof. Again, you don't have to say it, it's just taken for granted. Proof means empirical proof. duh, like, people think, well, what else could it mean, right? Show me the scientific study that has established the existence of angels. I say, no, there isn't one. Well, then how do you know? Well, because we have another source of knowledge. What is it? Revelation. No, that's just make-believe, that's just believe. No, that is a source of knowledge. Now, you might not, someone else who's not Muslim, they might not concede that it's a source of knowledge. That's taken for granted, and we can have that discussion, right? But that is our claim, right? That is our claim, that this is actually a source of knowledge, and therefore, if something is affirmed in the Quran, that is a dalil, and we call it that. Where's the dalil? Dalil can be a verse of the Quran. Dalil can be a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that's been rigorously authenticated, right? These are dalils, they're indications of knowledge. From the modern perspective, no. I mean, the Bible is not treated that way anymore, right? And the Quran is not part of the cultural framework, so it's not recognized either. So if you don't know something empirically, then you don't know it. You can believe in it, but you can't know it. And we would reject that. We say, no, there's another source of knowledge. And affirming revelation with confidence as a source of knowledge has huge implications, right? What else do we know from revelation? Well, we know our origins, where we came from, how we were created. We know why we were created. We know where we're going, right? We know that there will be a life in the grave, and that there will be a day of resurrection, and that there will be a resurrection and a judgment. Imagine if you take the Quran out, right? What do you lose in terms of the worldview? All of a sudden, and this is what the Western world has experienced over the last 300 years, as Christianity, for various reasons, has stumbled and fallen, and also the kind of rise of the modern scientific worldview. Two processes go on. Again, the course gets into it. We can't do it all now. I'm just trying to whet your taste here. That perspective has been lost. So many modern people, the modernity, one of the features of it is this idea of alienation, right? Human beings are alienated. They don't know who they are anymore. Who are we? If we're really just a glorified animal, right, that just kind of happened to evolve over eons of time for no reason and no purpose, and without any, reason or purpose, this completely changes the way you conceive of yourself, of your fellow human beings, of the world around you. If you ask people, well, where are you going when you die? Most people don't know, because how can you know? I can't give you a scientific experiment that's going to prove to you that there's an akhirah doesn't exist yet. I mean, that's a future eschatological reality, right? So if you don't have revelation, you can't affirm knowledge of that, and it's just conjecture. And so people don't know, right? And that's why they're scared to death of death. I mean, it's normal to fear death, but when you really don't know, right, what's happening after, or you really think that, okay, this is it, I'm just going to go back to dust, or I have no clue, that's a very different prospect from a believer who has yaqeen, right, in his Lord or her Lord, and that when that person dies, they are going, they know what's going to happen, and they know why they're here, and they know what they need to do to prepare to get there. It puts you in a completely different, frame of mind, okay? A lot of times also, let me just see the time. 10 minutes, okay. A lot of times also you have, for example, ethical questions come up. And I would say, maybe 20, 30 years ago, some of the major questions that people had doubts or crises of faith over would be things like evolution, like these kind of scientific things. That's part of the classical modern paradigm, which arises out of the Enlightenment, the 18th century Enlightenment, which follows on the heels of the scientific revolution of the 17th century. And the Enlightenment paradigm, the classical modern paradigm, is basically everything is based on empirical science and reason, okay? We're now in a postmodern period. For the last 60, 70 years, we've moved into a postmodern. And so we now exist in a culture, in an intellectual and cultural environment where there's a great deal of relativism, or at least feigned relativism, because I think it's fake, but it's sort of a chic, affected relativism. And the idea is, okay, well, so we can't really know anything. Even science is doubted, and there are limits to science, and again, the course goes into that, and we as Muslims would have a place for science, but it's not the queen science for us. Like, it's integrated into a larger system, whereas for the modern world, science is kind of like is the be-all and end-all. But in the postmodern world, right, you have a whole different thing going on. And many of the claims that people make, or many of the issues on which people make very strong claims, are not so much questions of objective truth about, like, how did human beings come about, right? But there'll be questions on, like, moral and ethical issues, particularly things like, we know, like gender and sexuality, race issues, like all of the things that are kind of all the rage now, right? And people will feel really, really, really strong about this. And on some of these issues, right, including like LGBT and just gender more generally, like what we would affirm as Muslims is actually very different than what is being currently affirmed, especially in elite institutions like NYU and all of these, big universities in the Northeast and places like that. And so where you see the tensions and where you see the clash and where you see the crises of faith is, oh my gosh, well, okay, how can Islam not be, like, I don't know, LGBT affirming? And that's like the most horrible thing we're told, right? Like, because it means that you don't treat people equally and you don't confer people, on them, their dignity and so forth, right? So there's all of this stuff built up. And just like, the older thing, like you kind of have this evolution, a creation clash. Now you have a clash on these kind of ethical issues, right? And many Muslims, when you don't understand the deeper principles, it's very easy to kind of let go of your Islamic worldview because you don't really know what it is. And the surrounding worldview is so dominant and so powerful, and it's transmitted through language. I mean, it is language, like it's the language of thought. So literally people use words to describe things, and you come to conceive of the world that way through the language that's used, right? So just participating in a discourse is affecting the way you think. It's providing you with categories. It's formatting your, hard drive, okay, in your mind, and for you to see and interpret the world in particular ways. And a lot of times, Muslims don't understand that that's what's going on, and they just take it for granted that, whatever the going assumptions are, they don't see them as just assumptions. That's just what it is. Again, that's the implicit part of the worldview that it's very difficult to see until you're taught to see it, okay? And so then what happens? Well, okay, I take totally for granted X, Y, and Z assumptions about, I don't know, gender, whatever it is, okay? I'm just taking like some of the major points of contention today, okay? And it's just obvious that that's the case because that's what everyone's saying in my entire society. Like, at least the people on the right side of history in it are all saying one thing, okay? So if that's unexamined and you just take all of that on, what are you going to do when you come to the Quran? And when you come to the Hadith? And when you study a book of fiqh and you come to the Sharia, you're going to see it completely contradicts everything that you've been taught to think about certain things. And so what happens? That's where the crisis of faith comes. Because there's a clash now between what you have been, formed to think and how to conceive the world and what the reality actually is, the reality as mediated to us through revelation, right? And so how can we negotiate that? We have to do a lot of unpacking. We have to do a lot of deconstructing, another very common word, right? And it has its place, okay? We have to actually take a step back. We have to say, what are the assumptions that are at play here, right, in this current ethical discourse on X or Y issue, right? If you don't do that, you're not going to really be able to answer the question. And so what you do is you either completely deform Islam and you come up with some Islam that no one's ever heard about that, miraculously just happens to completely jive with the kind of ethical intuitions of 21st century secular America. Like, how unlikely is that? Like, just a priori, that's like so unlikely that would be the case that it's suspicious, right? That would be the case. The Quran is just a miraculous prefigurement of like third wave feminism or something like that. It's like, okay. And what happens 50 years from now when we're on a different paradigm, right? And what happened 50 years ago when people thought differently and different pressures were at play, okay? So things like that, so either you kind of will distort Islam and try to come up with some pastiche, which doesn't really work, or, you have a crisis of faith and some people leave the faith. Well, I can't be part of this religion anymore. It's sexist, or it's this, or it's that. Who wants to worship a homophobic God like Desmond Tutu said, right? So really you have to do a lot of digging and a lot of work. And so the whole point about this, like, worldviews, and I haven't shown any of the slides that I picked slides from the larger presentation, but we don't have time to go through them. I think it's better just to talk this way directly and hopefully get you to understand the big picture here, right? A lot of times we'll answer questions, just using the going terms. Why do, women wear hijab? That's a very common question. And like knee-jerk, oh, it's about autonomy and freedom or something. It's like, really? Like, what about modesty? But no, like something is good if it promotes human autonomy and freedom, and if it's bad if it doesn't. Well, who said? I mean, that is the assumption of our society, so it's not surprising that people might think that, but we don't actually hold that as Muslims, right? Our religion is called Islam, which means what? Submission. And the modern world is like obsessed with this very peculiar notion of absolute kind of personal freedom. So it's almost a polar opposite. Not that we don't like freedom, like from tyrannical governments and, undue arrest and all of that stuff. We do. But that's like normal everyday freedom. But the modern consciousness is like obsessed with a very peculiar notion of freedom. The individual is here to be free of all social constraints, all moral constraints, all familial constraints, right? I am here to do me and to be me and just to kind of, unfold and just be whatever I can be. And I make it all up, right? I'm not here to kind of embody some type of objective ethical ideal, which was the Greek view and the Christian view and is the Muslim view, right? It's a completely different humanistic, anthropocentric view, which has nothing to do with Islam, right? And you have to do a lot of digging to see that. And only when you see that and question it and reject it, then you say, no, I mean, we're actually about submission. But submission to whom or to what? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only, right? And in that, we actually can get to true freedom, right? But even then, freedom is not necessarily our conscientious goal. Our goal is submission to our Creator. And freedom from all else besides Him is a byproduct of that. But our motivation is actually submission. A lot of modern people, they just bristle at that. For you to submit yourself to anything, including who you take to be God, is something that's just, unacceptable to the modern mind, right? Because this kind of anthropocentrism is so central to it. And unbeknownst to us, many of us, we just take on these assumptions because, again, they're absolutely everywhere. Every movie you watch, every song you hear, the theme is always, self-realization, breaking away from, other people's norms and thoughts and ideas. Nothing stands above you, right? You're kind of the sovereign, right? And so it's a completely different point of departure, right? On every level. And for us to really navigate the modern world successfully and to retain our faith as Muslims, right? And not only that, but to take Islam out confidently and present it to other people. Because look, Islam also is not just, we don't just say, oh, this is our religion, it's like a cultural thing. No, we affirm that this is objectively true. It is true in and of itself, right? And people who don't know that truth are at a loss because of that ignorance of it. And it is our job to articulate that and to call people to it, right? So we're not just hunkering down, how can we preserve our faith? That's a losing strategy. No, we're confident. We actually take it out, right? We actually challenge other people's views. I mean, politely, depending on context, right? But we have to have that confident, outward-facing vision. Yes, I believe in angels. I'm not ashamed to say it. Well, you want to have a discussion about it? Let's go have coffee. I'm ready. Hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqin. Bring your proof if you are true. We're perfectly willing to have discussions with anybody on any topic, right? Of any different religion, different moral persuasion, whatever. But for us to get to that point, we have to do a lot of digging and a lot of uncovering. So I'll leave it there. If there's time for a question or two, we can take those. If not, we can just move on. Sister, no? Okay. All right. So again, if you want to learn more about this, just go to that course and you'll get like an 8-hour version of this. This was just a teaser, so to speak. And lots of slides to go along with it as well. And then, there's the larger course as well. Jazakumullah khairan.